the photograph that turns back time. The moment Sarah found the photograph, her life split in two. The reality she knew, and the impossible one the photograph promised. It was a faded Polaroid tucked inside the old leather-bound journal she had bought from a thrift store. At first glance, it was just an ordinary image. A quaint cafe with striped awnings, a couple laughing at an outdoor table, and a clock on the wall frozen at 3:17 p.m. But as she turned it over, a chill ran down her spine. Written in neat cursive were the words, "You'll know when you're ready. A future you." Sarah laughed nervously, brushing off the discovery as some quirky note from a previous owner. But later that evening, as she held the photograph under the warm glow of her bedside lamp, she noticed something eerie. In the cafe window, barely visible, was her own reflection, wearing a coat she didn't own yet and a watch she hadn't worn in years. The photo shouldn't exist. She had never been to this cafe, never sat at that table, and yet there she was, captured in its ghostly confines. The clock's time, the cryptic note, the reflection, it felt like a cosmic prank. But the real twist came when she found herself inexplicably drawn to the photograph. Each time she looked at it, a strange hum filled her ears, like the static of an old TV. The longer she stared, the stronger the pull, until one evening, it happened. She was sitting at her kitchen table, the photo in her hand, when the hum intensified. The air grew thick, her vision blurred, and her head swam with vertigo. Then, with a snap that felt like a rubber band breaking, the world shifted. When she opened her eyes, the hum was gone. The Polaroid was no longer in her hand. Instead, she found herself standing on a cobblestone street under the golden glow of a setting sun. A light breeze carried the scent of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. In disbelief, Sarah looked around. The street was unfamiliar, lined with cozy boutiques and flower carts. Across from her was the cafe from the photograph. The same striped awnings, the same outdoor tables. A chalkboard sign by the door read, "Today's special, a moment in time." Her heart raced as she approached the cafe, her footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. The people at the tables didn't seem to notice her, their laughter and chatter blending into the background. The clock on the wall inside the cafe read 3:16 p.m. She stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. The interior was warm and inviting, with wooden beams and the aroma of fresh coffee. She froze when she saw herself at the corner table, her future self. Her other self wore the same coat from the Polaroid, the same watch she had long since lost. The woman at the table smiled knowingly and gestured for Sarah to sit. "You made it," the other Sarah said, her voice calm but tinged with emotion. Sarah sank into the chair, her mind spinning. How is this possible? The other Sarah slid a cup of coffee across the table. "It's not about how, it's about why. This cafe is special. It exists between moments. And you, Sarah, are here because you're at a crossroads." "A crossroads?" Sarah echoed, her voice trembling. Future Sarah nodded. "You've felt it, haven't you? That ache in your chest, the feeling that something's missing." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She had felt it, an emptiness she couldn't explain, a longing for something she couldn't name. "This photograph," the future Sarah continued, pulling out the same Polaroid, "it's not just a picture. It's a key. And this cafe is the door. You can go back, Sarah, back to any moment you choose. But there's a cost." Sarah stared at the photograph, her mind racing. What cost? Future Sarah's expression darkened. The life you know will change. Memories will fade, choices will unravel, and nothing will be the same. But if you're willing to let go, you can rewrite your story. Sarah hesitated. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Could she really leave everything behind? And if she could, what moment would she return to? "You don't have much time," Future Sarah said, glancing at the clock. "When it strikes 3:17, the cafe will disappear." Sarah's eyes darted to the clock, 3:16 and counting. The seconds ticked away, each one louder than the last. "What would you choose?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Future Sarah smiled sadly. "I already made my choice. That's why I'm here, to make sure you don't make the same mistakes." The room seemed to grow dimmer as the clock's second hand neared its mark. Sarah closed her eyes, her mind racing through the moments of her life. There was one memory, one regret, that loomed larger than the rest. And as the clock struck 3:17, she made her decision. When Sarah opened her eyes, She was standing in the middle of her childhood home. The familiar scent of her mom's lavender-scented candles filled the air, and the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the lace curtains. She was back in her teenage years. She looked down at herself and realized her body had shifted too. Her arms were thinner, her hands smaller, the way they had been when she was 16. Her old denim jacket felt snug around her shoulders, and her favorite pair of worn-out sneakers peeked out from under her jeans. It was as if the years had melted away, leaving her as she once was. The sound of laughter floated in from the kitchen. Her chest tightened. She hadn't heard that laugh in years, not since the accident. She moved toward the sound, her legs trembling. As she stepped into the kitchen, she saw her younger brother, Ethan, perched on a stool, dipping cookies into a glass of milk. He was alive. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Ethan looked up, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Hey, sis!" "Finally decided to join me?" he teased, his voice light and carefree. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced a smile. "Yeah, just thought I'd check in on you, cookie thief," she said, her voice wavering. For the next few hours, Sarah soaked in every moment. She laughed at Ethan's silly jokes, helped him with his homework, and even joined him for a game of catch in the backyard. It felt like a dream she never wanted to wake up from. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, a nagging thought crept into her mind. She had come back for a reason. This wasn't just about reliving happy memories. It was about changing the course of history. The accident had happened on a Friday night. Ethan had snuck out to meet his friends, and on his way home, his car had skidded on the rain-slicked road. She had blamed herself for years, thinking she could have stopped him if only she'd noticed he was gone. As the clock ticked toward 9 p.m., Sarah knew what she had to do. "Ethan," she called, finding him in the living room playing video games. He looked up, his face glowing in the blue light of the TV. "What's up?" "Stay in tonight," she said, her tone firm but kind. "Please." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why? I already told you I was just going to hang out with the guys for a bit." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I just have a bad feeling, that's all. Humor me, okay?" He hesitated, studying her face. "You're acting weird. Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. I really want you to stay. We can watch a movie or something." After a long pause, Ethan sighed. "Fine, but you owe me a tub of popcorn." Relief washed over her, and she pulled him into a hug. "Deal." They spent the evening watching one of Ethan's favorite comedies, their laughter filling the room. Sarah stayed close to him, silently vowing not to let him out of her sight. The night passed without incident, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt at peace. She had done it. She had changed the timeline. But the following morning, she noticed something strange. The edges of her memory felt blurred, as if parts of her life were being erased. She couldn't remember what she had eaten for breakfast yesterday, or the name of her high school best friend. It was as future Sarah had warned, changing the past came at a price. Days turned into weeks, and while Sarah cherished her time with Ethan, she began to feel the cracks in her reality widening. Friends she remembered didn't seem to exist, and events she knew had happened were now just empty voids in her mind. And then, one evening, the Polaroid appeared on her bedside table. She hadn't seen it since she'd left the cafe, but now it was back, the same cryptic note scrawled on the back, "You'll know when you're ready." This time, the photograph was different. The cafe was empty, the clock stuck at 3:17, and her own reflection was nowhere to be seen. Sarah stared at it, her heart pounding. The pull of the photograph was stronger now, and she understood its message. If she stayed, she would lose herself completely. The timeline she had created would unravel her existence. But if she used the photograph again, there was no telling where or when it would take her. She held the Polaroid tightly, tears streaming down her face as she glanced at Ethan's room, where he lay sound asleep. "I'm sorry," she whispered. With a deep breath, she focused on the photograph, letting its pull consume her once more. The hum returned, louder this time, a tidal wave of sound and sensation. The room twisted and blurred, and Sarah felt as though she were being stretched and compressed all at once. When the world snapped back into focus, she was standing outside the cafe again, just as she had the first time. The striped awnings fluttered in the breeze, the warm light spilling out onto the cobblestone street. The clock on the wall inside still read 3:16 p.m. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the door, the familiar jingle of the bell ringing in her ears. Inside, she wasn't greeted by the friendly buzz of patrons or the comforting scent of coffee. The cafe was empty, save for one figure sitting in the corner, the older Sarah. "You came back," future Sarah said, her voice soft but heavy with understanding. "I had no choice," Sarah replied, her throat tight. It was all falling apart. Future Sarah nodded. "That's the cost of meddling with time. It's a thread, Sarah. Pull one strand and the whole fabric unravels." Sarah sank into the chair across from her. "What happens now?" Future Sarah reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the Polaroid. "You start again, but this time you need to choose carefully. You can't fix everything, no matter how much you want to. Some things are meant to happen." Her words struck a chord, the weight of the truth settling over Sarah like a heavy blanket. "I just wanted to save him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know," future Sarah said, her gaze filled with compassion. "And you did. But at what cost? Your story matters too. You can't lose yourself to save someone else." The clock ticked closer to 3:17, and Sarah knew her time was running out. She reached for the photograph, but this time, future Sarah placed a hand over hers. "Before you go, remember this. Every choice comes with a sacrifice. There's no perfect path, only the one you decide to walk." Sarah nodded, the tears streaming down her face. As the clock struck 3:17, the cafe dissolved around her, and she was consumed by the hum once more. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her present-day apartment, sitting at her kitchen table. The Polaroid lay before her, but this time, the image was blank, just a white square bordered by black. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend, inviting her to lunch. For the first time in weeks, Sarah smiled. She didn't know what the future held or whether she had made the right choices. But as she tucked the Polaroid into her journal and grabbed her coat, she felt a glimmer of hope. Sometimes she realized life wasn't about fixing the past. It was about living in the present and choosing to move forward, one step at a time. The weeks that followed felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Sarah threw herself into her work, reconnected with friends she'd grown distant from, and started noticing the small joys in life she had once overlooked. The world didn't feel perfect, but it felt real, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe deeply in its imperfection. She kept the Polaroid tucked away, unsure if it still held its strange power or if it had served its purpose. Some nights, she would pull it out and stare at the blank space where an image had once been, wondering if it was waiting for her to make another choice, or if its journey with her was over. Ethan lingered in her thoughts. She knew the version of him she had saved in the past would continue to live on in some timeline she would never see. And though she grieved the loss, she also cherished the time she had been given. A second chance to laugh with him, to hold him close, to say goodbye in a way she hadn't before. One evening, as she tidied her apartment, she noticed something peculiar. The Polaroid, which had been blank for weeks, now held a faint outline. She held it up to the light, her heart racing as the details began to take shape. It wasn't the cafe or her childhood home. It was a sprawling field of wildflowers under a golden sunset, a place she didn't recognize but felt inexplicably drawn to. A single word was scrawled at the bottom of the photograph. Soon. Sarah's mind raced with questions. What did it mean? Was it another journey? Another test? She placed the photograph back on her desk and decided not to dwell on it. For now, she had chosen her path, and she was determined to walk it with open eyes. Months later, while on a road trip with friends, Sarah noticed a sign for a nature reserve. As they drove closer, a wave of déjà vu washed over her. When they arrived, she stepped out of the car and froze. The field stretched out before her, exactly as it had appeared in the photograph. The same wildflowers, the same golden light. Her friends wandered ahead, snapping photos and laughing, but Sarah stood still, the Polaroid clutched in her hand. She felt the hum again, not the oppressive pull of time, but a gentle resonance, as if the universe was whispering that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She smiled, letting the moment wash over her. The photograph had brought her here, but she realized it wasn't about the destination. It was about learning to trust herself, to embrace the unknown, and to find beauty in the journey. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah joined her friends, laughing as they chased fireflies and shared stories late into the night. For the first time, the weight of the past lifted, and she felt free. The Polaroid, now tucked safely in her pocket, no longer glowed or changed. It remained a simple photograph of a beautiful place, a reminder that life's greatest moments often come when we let go and simply live. That night, as Sarah lay under the stars, a deep sense of peace settled over her. The Polaroid rested in her jacket pocket close to her heart, but she didn't feel the need to pull it out or study it. For the first time since discovering its strange power, she felt completely at ease with where she was. The days that followed were filled with the kind of simple, unplanned moments she had forgotten how to appreciate. She and her friends explored hidden trails, shared campfire stories, and laughed until their sides ached. The Polaroid remained untouched, a quiet companion rather than a guide. But Sarah wasn't naive. She knew that whatever force had given her the Polaroid wasn't done with her yet. And sure enough, as the trip neared its end, something changed. It happened as they were packing up to leave the field of wildflowers. Sarah was gathering her things when she noticed the Polaroid glowing faintly again, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. Her breath caught as she pulled it from her pocket. The image of the field had faded, replaced by another blank frame. Her friends called to her from the car, but she hesitated. The Polaroid felt warm in her hands, almost alive, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She slipped it back into her pocket and joined them, keeping the strange development to herself. Back home, the hum returned. It was faint at first, an almost imperceptible vibration she might have ignored if not for her history with the photograph. But over the next few days, it grew stronger, more insistent. The blank space on the Polaroid seemed to shimmer, as if a new image were trying to break through. One evening, unable to resist any longer, Sarah held the Polaroid under a lamp and waited. Slowly, a new scene emerged. It was a dimly lit room she didn't recognize, cluttered with stacks of books and scattered papers. A clock on the wall read 3:17, and in the corner of the frame was a desk with a single lamp casting a pool of light. In the center of the desk was an old-fashioned telephone, its rotary dial gleaming. Sarah's pulse quickened. The image was eerily specific, as if it were pointing her towards something, or someone. But there was no address, no clear indication of what to do next, just the photograph and the growing hum that seemed to resonate in her chest. She studied the image for hours, searching for clues. The clock, the books, the faint pattern of the wallpaper, none of it was familiar. Frustrated and restless, she considered ignoring it altogether, but the pull was too strong. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished with her yet. The next morning, she began her search. She showed the Polaroid to antique dealers, historians, anyone who might recognize the room in the photograph. Most people dismissed her as eccentric, but one shopkeeper, an elderly man with sharp eyes, paused. "I've seen that wallpaper before," he said, tapping the edge of the photograph. "Used to be common in old boarding houses. Not many left standing these days, but there's one over on Ash Street that might still have it." Sarah's heart raced as she thanked him and hurried to the address he'd given her. The building was weathered and unassuming, its windows clouded with age. She stepped inside, her breath catching as the musty air hit her. The interior matched the photograph exactly. The stacks of books, the scattered papers, even the clock on the wall. It was all there. Her hands trembled as she approached the desk, the old telephone sitting in its place like a relic from another time. She reached for it, half expecting it to ring, but the room remained silent. Unsure of what to do, she picked up the receiver and held it to her ear. At first, there was only static, but then, faintly, a voice emerged. "Sarah?" It was Ethan. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the desk for support. "Ethan? Is it really you?" His voice was faint, as if coming from a great distance. "I don't have much time. I'm stuck, Sarah. I need your help." Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to understand. "Where are you? How do I help you?" The static grew louder, threatening to drown out his words. "The Polaroid? It's the key. You have to." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind racing. Ethan was alive, or at least part of him was, trapped somewhere beyond her understanding. And the Polaroid was her only way to reach him. As she looked down at the photograph, a new image began to take shape. It was Ethan, standing in a shadowy corridor, his hand outstretched as if waiting for hers. The hum grew louder, filling the room with its resonance. Sarah knew she had a choice to make. Walk away from the mystery and let Ethan go, or follow the Polaroid's path, no matter where it might lead. Her hand trembled as she placed the Polaroid in her pocket. The road ahead was uncertain, but her decision was clear. She would find him, whatever it took. As Sarah stood there, watching her brother laugh and joke around with his friends, she realized something crucial. No matter how much she had wanted to change the past, no matter how many times she had tried to rewrite the story, some things were meant to stay the same. Ethan was here, alive, and the memories they shared, the moments they had yet to make, were worth holding on to. The Polaroid had led her on a journey through time, showing her the price of playing with fate. But in the end, Sarah understood the lesson she had been avoiding all along. The future was unpredictable, and while she could change certain things, some parts of life, like love, family, and the joy of simply being present, were meant to unfold on their own. As she turned away from the group and gazed up at the sky, the weight of the decisions she'd made seemed to lift. She had her brother, and she had her future ahead of her. The Polaroid, now tucked safely away in her bag, no longer held the power it once did. It was just a photograph, a reminder that sometimes the best moments were the ones we didn't try to change.